What real problems in blockchain performance or usability does Avail actually solve that existing solutions actually have failed to address?
Data availability is not a very easy concept to grasp. The first blockchains after Bitcoin were like Ethereum and a few others, and all of these were severely constrained on scale. If we want crypto or blockchains to go to mainstream usage like population scale, it can't really happen on one single blockchain. Modular blockchains in that sense are really made up of components that are optimized and which, when combined together, create far more scalable, more interoperable experiences.
What makes you confident that Avail's approach won't just add another silo?
Yeah, I mean,
Hello, I'm Dr. Lorena Nessi from CCN, and today I'm joined by Anurag Arjun, founder of Avail and previously co-founder at Polygon Technology. We will discuss the rise of modular blockchains, why data availability has become a critical area, and Avail's path since spinning out from Polygon, as well as the main challenges. Arjun, Anurag, thanks for joining us today.
thank you very much for having me. Very much looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, CCN as well. We are very happy to have you here. And we're going to start with our first question. So the modular narrative is gaining traction very quickly, but many users still don't really know or understand what data availability really means. Do you think the industry is overcomplicating the term to sound innovative? What does Avail really do?
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, like data availability is not a very easy concept to grasp. For most people, it's kind of like very technical, to be very honest. And so, essentially, but data availability on its own is a very core component of what it takes to scale blockchains in general. So, I mean, to give some context, right? Like, I mean, the first blockchains after Bitcoin were like Ethereum and a few others, and all of these were severely constrained on scale. And the progression was that there were a bunch of blockchains that were kind of came after Ethereum. So think of like Polygon or Binance Smart Chain or like Solana, for example. So all of these are kind of like layer one blockchains, each with their own value propositions and security and so on. So we all know that essentially, if we want crypto or blockchains to go to mainstream usage like population scale, it can't really happen on one single blockchain. It requires like multiple chains, right? Like, I mean, very similar to how Web2 works really, right? Like when you use something like your iPhone or let's say TikTok or Google, for example, like hundreds and millions of servers are running behind all this infrastructure, which to the regular user, it doesn't really matter, right? Like when you're using Google or you're using ChatGPT, for example, right? Like doesn't really matter what runs behind it. But having said that, all of that infrastructure is very, very important. It doesn't require the normal user to understand all of this, but we are so early in this industry that that all these very low-level technical terms are kind of very public in nature. It's almost like when we were building out the early iterations of the internet, like things like TCP/IP or bunch of other, like network level constructs were being built, which today, if you're using the internet, doesn't really matter. Like if you don't know what these are, right? Like, but you kind of get the benefits of why it is there. Like, I mean, the internet is at the most part very invisible, right? Like you are just using apps on the application level, which is what matters. So I would say like data availability is something that is very much crucial to kind of scaling blockchains, and that's what Ethereum first started doing. Like when it wanted to scale, right? Like I mean, so Ethereum didn't want to become like like a fast cheap chain like Solana, right? Like it kind of had this whole layer 2 sort of a roadmap, which is technically called the roll-up centric roadmap in general. And so we have seen that play out very well, right? Like, I mean, there are now hundreds of layer 2 solutions or roll-ups, for example. And at the same time, there are hundreds of other blockchains also, almost launching every week or month. And so I think basically data availability, even though it's misunderstood, it's a very core part of, like scaling blockchains in general. So I would say like it doesn't really matter too much if people don't understand what it is. It's same as, like most people shouldn't have to understand how the internet works internally.
Absolutely. So let's go into modular blockchains, which is obviously something related and might have the same level of complexity. They are often framed as the next evolution of scalability. So what real problems in blockchain performance or usability does Avail actually solve that existing solutions actually have failed to address?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, right, like, I mean, what I call the first generation of blockchains, which is very monolithic blockchains, this is like typically the first iteration of Ethereum or Solana or Binance Smart Chain, like all of these are, what I call the first generation, which is monolithic blockchains in general. And then there is this next evolution, which is more modular. Now, why is it called modular? Is because essentially we kind of take what constitutes a blockchain and break it into different pieces, and then kind of optimize each component very heavily. So these are, in technical terms, these are, there is data availability, there is execution, there is like finality. So not getting into too much technical, but essentially, like if I were to give you an analogy, like think about how, let's say, something like cars or motorcycles were first manufactured, right? Like, I mean, the first cars or motorcycles, for example, were manufactured in one factory with everything happening, like manufactured, being created in one, right? Like, I mean, but if you see like the current generation or the next generation of cars or motorcycles or whatever you want to, I mean, this can be applied to any emerging technology. Like today's motorcycles or cars are not made in one factory. Like, I mean, parts, like modular parts are created in different, factories, and then they are assembled in one place. This happens because, once a technology matures, you want each part to be optimized for what it does best, right? Like, and also for economies of scale, it drives the cost of manufacturing down, right? Like, so that's why today, if you want like a handmade motorcycle or a handmade car, it's going to be very expensive, very premium, for example. But if it's made up of modular components, you can drive the cost down, right? Like, so that happens in every industry at some point in time. So modular blockchains in that sense are really made up of components that are optimized, and which, when combined together, create far more scalable, more interoperable experiences.
Yeah, so that might just be getting better and better. But going back to the roots, Avail spun out of Polygon in 2023, right? So what were the main philosophical or technical disagreements that drove you to make Avail an independent project?
Yeah, I think when we started Avail within Polygon, we had just actually, we conceptualized Avail back in 2020 within Polygon. And at that time, we had just launched the Polygon POS chain. And so it was like basically the Polygon POS chain build out was done, and we are focused on, like getting more and more adoption there. And then we were thinking of what next, right? Like what should be done to kind of, like ensure that we are future ready in that sense. And we already knew that there will be the number of chains that will be there will be expanding, and that has played out like we thought it would, right? Like if you kind of see today, there are hundreds of chains, maybe even thousands of chains. So that has played out very well. And so at that time, we thought that we should be building infrastructure for enabling these high number of chains, right? Like so if you see, kind of look back at what we did at Polygon back at that time. So we actually invested in broadly two areas. One is like ZK rollups, and it was like Avail. There were a bunch of other projects as well, but broadly the categories were this. And so the idea was that we would kind of create this infrastructure that would house an unlimited number of chains. And so that was how we kind of conceptualized it. Over time, what happened is that Polygon ended up having, like we actually at Polygon, we grew very fast, very quickly. There was a time when we had acquired like 3 ZK teams, like Hermes, Maiden, like Zero. So we ended up having about 8 different products, apart from Polygon POS. And I thought Avail was too important to kind of like be one of those 8 products, right? Like, I mean, it required like dedicated focus, support, build out. So it was like a very pragmatic call, in the sense that the brand of Avail and Polygon were also quite different in terms of categories, right? Like, so Polygon was like a more execution, Polygon POS focused and with a ZK rollup feature. And ours was more like a new layer one that would kind of house a lot of rollups. So it was like, so there were some pragmatic concerns. There were some, like in general focus concerns and so on. And so then we decided that we'll just spin out.
Yeah, different aims. So your recent partnership with SOOHO connects Avail to Korea's stablecoin and payments ecosystem. And that is just an example. How do you ensure that technical collaborations like this one don't become another case of blockchain being used for marketing headlines rather than genuine adoption?
I think marketing announcements now like do not work like they, like as you kind of refer them to. Like basically, there's no sense making just a marketing announcement without actually kind of delivering on the integration in general. With as we have already seen, like with USD based stable coins, like it has grown to like a big market, like almost reaching 300 billion, almost like north of 270 billion. And as we see with the Circle IPO this year, which was immensely successful, I think traditional institutions, especially in the US and elsewhere, have started looking very, very seriously. Like almost every bank is now looking to kind of issue their own stable coin, for example, and so on. And with the success of USD stable coins, there has been like now renewed vigor for local currency stable coins. And given that, like if you see what has been happening in Korea is as well, is that there's been like a lot of positive news around regulation around the Korean won stable coins, yeah, essentially, because Korea is also like it's a relatively small market in terms of number of people, but like it's very large in that sense, and the government is very progressive. And so we've had like a presence in Korea for some time. We have a team member permanently stationed there, and we saw a lot of promising news about like local currency stable coins, especially the Korean won stable coin. We've been also kind of working with various initiatives, like let's say the Finternet initiative, which is kind of trying to do a lot of global payments through different local currency stable coins. So I think our partnership with SOOHO is primarily like aimed at seeing how we can take part in the Korean won stablecoin, and which also acts as a learning opportunity for us to kind of see how other currency stablecoins might go. So that's what really is. But yeah, to be honest, essentially it's about getting those stable coins issued, interoperable with other chains, for example. So we're doing a bunch of stuff with Kaya, which is this chain from from a consortium of Cacao and Line, which is essentially like number one super app in Southeast Asia, both Cacao and Line, right? Like so I mean, essentially, I think that is going to be big. Things like the euro stable coin haven't gone that big, but I think their time will come as with other currency stable coins.
Yes, and you have touched on interoperability, right, which is often cited as the future of Web3, one of the main priorities. However, every project seems to be actually building many unifying layers, their own unifying layers. So what makes you confident that Avail's approach won't just add another silo?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the last 1.5 year, we've been actually working on various iterations to our architecture. So we initially started off with like a proof aggregation sort of a approach, which like we initially thought would apply to rollups on Avail in general. But then we kind of iterated with a bunch of things like with ZK, with zero knowledge proofs, with Ts, and finally, we settled on this, the current architecture, which is the Avail Nexus architecture. And like we are now able to kind of connect any chain that is there to our solution. So for example, so of course we are starting with around 12 chains, which are some of the most popular chains, but the framework allows this to be kind of connected to any chain really. And so I mean, you're right, like a lot of projects are working on solutions that you kind of unify their part of the ecosystem, for example, and so on. But like you should also see this in the perspective of this is kind of like a race to kind of find out which of the technology is works best in a more pragmatic scenario. And to be honest, like almost all of these interoperability projects will be successful in a way, because essentially we are moving away from like a very chain specific universe. Like what I mean by that is, like if you like are a normal user wanting to use blockchains, initially you say you kind of came into the space, said that okay, I want to use Ethereum, or Ethereum is too expensive, let me go to Solana or go to BSC or go to like Avalanche, for example, or so on, right? Like, but now there are like 100, maybe 500 different chains, like, so it's very hard to kind of like navigate this. Like I know users who have accounts on 10 different chains, like some you have on 80 different chains, for example, right? Like, so it's very hard to kind of approach it from a chain specific sort of a way. So what we kind of ended up building was, can we kind of abstract all of these chains, and it doesn't matter where the app is, the user should be able to access the app within a few clicks. And it kind of we kind of take a look at from the user's point of view, but also from the app developer's point of view. So if you take a look at something like Aave is deployed on 12 different chains. Like it's the exact same code, it's the exact same logic. It's just that they kind of did these deployments in a time when interoperability wasn't that mature, and they didn't want to lose out on users on that chain. Ideally, the world should work like an app should be deployed on one chain, and no matter where the user has funds on, they should be able to access that app in a few clicks. And the boundaries of chains should disappear in that sense. Like from a user point of view, it shouldn't matter what chains are there, right? Like, I mean, apps should just compete on things like convenience, cost, spread, that sort of a thing, right? Like, I mean, when you are kind of using something like Uber, or like let's say a food delivery app, like you don't really care whether that app has its server in Google Cloud Europe or Google Cloud US, or like wherever, right? Like, I mean, it's that is up to the app developer to take care of. For the
Unless the
user, it's
cloud
just a
fails,
functionality.
right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Then you
Yeah. So
know
what
that.
I'm trying to,
Then you research
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Once in a while, yes. To be very honest. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, like, today users in crypto are very much used to apps on Ethereum or apps or Solana or apps here. I'm saying basically with the right interoperability construct, all these boundaries between chains can disappear and users can just use apps. That is where we want to get to.
Yep. Yeah, that is the future, right, of adoption that we are all expecting to happen. So Avail handles core infrastructure that could underpin financial systems, right? So what's your ethical stance on decentralization versus accountability when a chain failure, going back to these issues with clouds or data issue affects real users?
No, I mean, see, basically, the thing is that blockchains began at a time when, see, this happens with every new technology, to be very honest. Like, initially, technology is, every new emerging technology is very raw, right? Like, today, like, if you see something like Chat GPT, it's a very refined form of, like, interface or form factor that you are kind of dealing with. Like, in the early days of AI, it was very hard for regular people to use it, in general. And so, like, in blockchain, what has happened is that because blockchain development is also very financialized, because like there is like money involved, there are like fundraising. I mean, it's a totally different monetary system in general. And so, because it began that way, core software development in the space is also very public in general. uh, and so users are kind of have to kind of deal with this low level complexity in general. Uh, so what basically the point is that, I think when technology matures, right? Like, I mean, it kind of like becomes more and more abstracted, more and more easy for regular users to use, in general. And like, in that sense, like, if when people use the raw layer of the blockchain, right, like, they have to deal with things like seed phrases and like forgetting their like passwords, for example, or losing their ledgers, for example. And so there's a bunch of things around that. And like, if you kind of look at traditional finance systems, these are all closed source systems, like black boxes. You don't know what's happening inside. Blockchains are very open systems, like they are open to scrutiny. If something is written, like, they will, everyone, a lot of people will try to hack into it, like, which also makes it more secure as we go ahead, right? Like, so blockchains in general, like, suffer from two twin problems, right? Like, one is, like, users have to deal with the blockchain directly without any abstraction, and so that causes a lot of problems. Second, it is all open, so there is a lot of threats, a lot of hackers trying to hack the system, for example, which is good and bad in the sense that like, good that these systems become stronger over time, more hardened over time, but also because like, early users have to run the risk of like getting hacked and stuff like that. So what the overall point I'm trying to make is, like, once we kind of move past this, and we are already doing that to a certain extent, we started getting into that phase where like, things like, as basic as, if I forget my password, so will I be able to get my access to my funds back, for example, right? Like, I mean, things as simple as that. But also things like, if I get hacked, can I have some insurance, for example? Can I get some guarantees on that, for example? So all of that slowly, like, the industry is being taking steps to kind of do that. And I think the more and more crypto moves mainstream, like, we will have to kind of do a trade-off between complete decentralization and like, user safety uh, guarantees, and so on. I think that is completely okay, right? Like, I mean, I think the number one benefit of in blockchains is that they are a credible platform for apps. Like, basically, in general, a lot of traditional financial institutions have tried to bootstrap their own private chains. Like JP Morgan has been trying to do it, and bunch of other organizations have been trying to do their own private chains. That doesn't really work. That hasn't worked to. And what has worked is, like public platforms, and then people deploying apps on top of it. And so all the TradFi institutions are now trying to kind of plug into this. Now, when it gets to scale, they will demand all of the things that come from handling things at population scale, which is user security, like reporting, regulatory reporting, for example, KYC, AML. So all of those things will happen, and I think it's perfectly fine to kind of have this trade-off between both.
Great. It seems that your attitude is very positive towards the future of blockchains, but also we would say that Avail positions itself as chain agnostic, right? That there is this neutrality about blockchains. But as competition between ecosystems actually intensifies, is true neutrality even possible, you think, when funding and partnerships come into play? And, there are these different ecosystem groups that might be competing for developers or funding or users or even the attention of the community?
Yeah, I mean, see, to be honest, like as I've said before in this conversation as well, chains are important, but they are not so important as before, right? Like, I mean, because it's simply because it's chain, lot of chain infrastructure, execution chain infrastructure is now very commoditized. So, like launching let's say like a EVM chain now is basically like, it used to take probably a year or more for people to launch a chain. Now it takes probably like a day, maybe half an hour also, if you're up for it, for example. So a lot of that is becoming commoditized. So essentially, and apps also end up deploying on different chains, right? Like I said, Aave has deployments on 12 different chains. Each app is deployed on like at least 5 chains or maybe more. And so I think the importance of specific chains will go down significantly once like interoperability, like especially that's what we are aiming with for Avail, that matures more and more. I think the boundaries of chains will start to disappear, and the primary gateway will be of a user saying, I want to do this, just give me the best way to execute a trade, or like lend this asset or borrow this asset, or get some credit, for example, and so on. And there will be like this abstraction layer that will just go to all these chains and find out which one has the best rates, lowest fees, and so on, best liquidity. And so I think that is where the world is going.
Brilliant. So let's think about the future for one of our final questions. Many founders speak about the future of Web3. But I would like you, given that you express this positivity about blockchains, what's one uncomfortable truth about the blockchain industry today that you think most leaders are still unwilling to admit?
Yeah, I think to be very honest, what has happened in crypto and public blockchains is that a lot of people, even today, are very comfortable operating in this closed silos of the crypto native sort of a ecosystem in general, because I mean, it's also rational, because there is a lot of opportunity here. The users are more forgiving. You can get away with doing very less in general. So a lot of a big part of the industry focuses on catering to this very crypto native ecosystem, which is fair. which is where your early users will come from. It's easy to bootstrap users from this ecosystem. But with traditional financial institutions now turning their gaze at public blockchains in general, so you'll see a lot of people coming from that industry and trying to kind of play in this in general. And I think we are a lot of the industries underestimating that, because in general, like, blockchains are a very powerful infrastructure for, to be honest, the future of finance. Like, blockchains are very simple to be at their very heart, right? Like, they are ledgers. They are ledgers that can store, track and store value. Now, that value can be, crypto native tokens. It could be USD, like tokenization, for example. It could be treasury, US bonds. It could be stocks. Like, technically, it can be used to express anything really. So
Well, I'm
today's
definitely
finance
going to
really.
keep that as a quote, Anurag. I'm going to quote you as blockchains are very simple. That will be good.
No, I mean, I'm saying, like, if you kind of zoom out a bit, right? Like, I mean, try to reason from first principles. How does your bank store your balance, or how does, like, the central bank of a country know how much money is circulating in the country, for example? These are all stored on some databases. So your bank has a database. Like, all banks have a database. They share that data with the central bank, and so on, right? Like, I mean, and every system in the world really is a ledger. It's a database. Like, so money runs on ledgers. E-commerce runs on ledgers, right? Like, I mean, when you're buying something, whether within the country or outside the country, some entry is being made saying that you need to pay this, that system, that good needs to be shipped from this side to this side. So these are all ledgers. Now, these are all ledgers run by different companies or banks or governments, right? Blockchains are by far the the only way to do this at population scale on a global level, where technically no one single company or no single country is running this ledger. Now, what do you do with this ledger? Like, it's up to the builders. But I think basically, the way, especially how finance works today, and how the world is very interconnected, it's all global, right? Like, I mean, essentially, 20 years ago, maybe sending money from the US to, let's say, Singapore, might have been very, very hard. Now, like, it's comparatively easier. But the underlying systems are still 15 years, 20 years old, right? Like, I mean, some transfers will take 1 week, for example, and so on. And so it is because everyone runs their own ledger, and then these ledgers try to talk to each other. And the very simple reasoning I want to say is, imagine if this could all be kind of replaced by one single global ledger. Then,
Yeah, it
like,
is. It is such an obvious idea that it's
yeah,
actually a brilliant idea. It's like, why didn't we have this before?
correct,
Right.
correct, correct, correct. Like, I mean, come to think of it, you can send a message on, let's say, WhatsApp, or Instagram, or Facebook Messenger, from like one corner of the world to the other. Like, but like, sending messages is like almost instant. Why
Mhm.
isn't sending money the same way, for example, right? Like,
Absolutely.
so things like that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anurag. Is there anything else that you think we should add to this conversation? Anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we are kind of progressing with, like, kind of the number of chains that are increasing rapidly, and, we are, of course, building these interoperability rails so that it's making it, it'll be much, much easier to access this. I think privacy is also like a very important part, right? Like, I mean, and thankfully, um, uh, awareness about that is increasing in general. Like, I mean, again, going back to TradFi or traditional financial analogies, like, it would be like a normal user would find it very hard to kind of share their bank balance, bank statement data to everyone, right? Like, and which is what is there today with today's blockchains, right? Like, and anyone can see what like what your transactions are, what are you doing on blockchains. And so I think for crypto to go mainstream, like along with scalability, interoperability, you also need a privacy element. And I think awareness about and development around that is also starting to slowly increase. And in general, we are also, like releasing something next year on that, so that like it's basically you should be able to access any app on any chain very seamlessly, but also keep your footprint private.
Brilliant. Great. Well, we're looking forward to hearing more about that when that is released. Thank you so much, Anurag, for joining us
Yep.
today at CCN. Thank you. That was Anurag Arjun, and I'm Dr. Lorena Nessi for CCN. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. And thank you, Anurag. See you later.